Hello, Merel. Welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you. We were joking, for those of you listening in the green room, how prepared we came to this conversation. Both of us have notebooks and pages of notes, so this is going to be a good one.
Thank you for having me, Ellen. I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Well, me as well. So thank you so much for again just bringing your genius to this show today. Meryl's case study is extremely exciting. We've had a few case studies on here before about email and email marketing, but never before have we had someone who made $500,000, $500,000 from one email with a small list. And Meryl's going to really break down for you what that actually looked like in practice. So I'm very excited to dive into that. But before we do, of course, we have to start with our usual. What is your cubicle to CEO story, Merrill? How did you make the jump from employee to entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I actually don't have a cubicle to the CEO story because I honestly the only corporation I've ever been in is my own. But I do have a very vast career life prior to becoming a business owner, which ranges, by the way, from working as a maid in Germany when there was like no minimum wage at that point. So I was making, maybe like $7 an hour or so and riding around on my bike, super pregnant, trying to
Wow.
create a little bit of money for our family, and then also a opera career. So I have a successful opera career sort of in my rearview mirror that I think honestly like really prepared me for this entrepreneurial world where we're constantly visible, we're using our voices, we're trying to understand what moves people. And when you spend over a decade like dissecting arias and sort of understanding like where are people going to cry most likely, like where is it, like how is it building up, you become very sort of technical and strategic about it. And I've never actually stopped doing that. I just like took that skill and transferred it right into being a business owner and how to create pitches that are soul stirring and give people full body chills the same way that I would sing, on a big stage or win a competition.
That is so cool how you've infused your past as an opera singer and music, especially because music is such a universal language, right? To
Yes.
your point, you don't have to understand the words, it's the emotions that are felt. And you're actually not the first person to come on our show who didn't work in a cubicle or in a traditional corporate job necessarily, which I think is actually a wonderful gift. So
Yeah, congrats.
it's great that you got to skip right past that.
Yeah.
But actually, we recently had another guest on, Marisa Corcoran, who also was a stage actor in a previous life.
And funny story, she's an alumni of mine. When we started working together, she was, copywriter, working with retainers, and the programs that she's still running, she developed working with me like a few years ago. And of course, we really connected over like how are we going to even more use our ability to perform right in our businesses. It was great working with her.
Wow, what a small world. Okay, that's so cool. I'll have to text her after and say I had the pleasure of chatting with you this morning as well. And yeah, totally. I mean, I come from a performance background as well in music, not as much with singing. That was always just a hobby of mine, but I grew up training in classical piano, did a lot of stage
Mm.
performances. So I
Yeah,
totally understand what you mean about reading the music, understanding where are the pauses,
yeah.
where are the phrases and the
The
staccatos and
build up
all.
and the yes.
Yes, yes, the crescendos.
Well, and I'm curious, Ellen. I find that working with coaches as a musician is not so different from the work that we do today in the sense that, you need to listen very carefully to and observe your clients and what they're experiencing. And also, right, so there's sort of like the gift of having been in coaching actually for a really long time and mentorship and understanding how those relationships work. There's and the performance aspect, and then there's also the ingrained discipline that comes with studying music
Mhm.
that transfers really, really well.
Absolutely. And I think this is just another key reminder before we jump into the case study today for all of you listening that there is so much real world experience and skills that you bring to entrepreneurship that are transferable even if they don't seem linear, right? So
Yeah.
even if you may have a background that's completely different than what you're doing today, don't treat yourself like you have nothing to bring to the table or that you know nothing. It's
Yes.
absolutely not true. There's so much transference and skills. And I think Meryl's Cubicle to CEO story is such a great reminder of that. So thank you for starting us off on that note, Meryl. I want to start with setting the scene of this case study. So when you had this moment of making $500,000 from this one email. Obviously, there was a lot that happened leading up to that point. So, at that stage in your business, how long did you already have your email list? How many
Hmm.
subscribers did you have on your list? And where had these subscribers primarily come from? So, let's start with those three,
Hmm.
context questions.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say I had about less than 2,000 for sure. So it was still a small list, and it might have even been like a sub 1,000 list at that point. It was really not a huge amount of people. I had my email list for, I would say, 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. At that point, they were fairly warm, right? So I always like say this when I tell this story, because people are like, oh, I could just, maybe run some ads and get this number of people on my list. But these were connections that came primarily from me guest teaching in other people's communities,
Mhm.
putting myself forward for speaking in a very specific community or something, already having sort of like that transfer of credibility happen when you are on somebody else's stage or join into, right, somebody else's community. There is like a lot of trust building that happens in that moment when somebody says like, I want to present this person to you all.
Mhm.
And that definitely shortened the sales cycle by a lot.
I could not agree with that more. In our community, we talk a lot about this concept of borrowed traffic and leveraging other people's audiences. And I truly
Yes.
believe that as an entrepreneur, if you don't already have an existing audience, that it's so important to really think about how do I connect with the gatekeepers of audiences that have already been built with my ideal clients, with my ideal followers or collaborators or whoever you're trying to reach. And I love that you used guest speaking opportunities as a way to do that. And I mean, this is kind of a tangent. We'll come back to the case study at hand, but I do just want to say I think people often undervalue or maybe overlook is probably a better word to
Yeah.
describe
Yeah.
this. They overlook the power of speaking in front of even, let's say, 5 to 10 people, even an intimate group,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yes. And how that connection, the exactly what Meryl said, the level of connection, the depth of connection in a live speaking opportunity or container, whether it's virtual or in person, is unmatched to anything else because when people get to spend quality time and see you live talking, those people who discover us or come through our communities in those ways always end up being the most loyal, the most engaged of anyone else. And so I just wanted to pull that out again for our listeners, Meryl.
Yeah, and I think, what I love about it is that it's actually accessible, right? First of all, we're not starting from scratch. We already decided that.
Yes.
So, but let's say that you are in, fairly beginning stages, or even if you're not in the beginning stages, there are always so many people that, like, even if it's like friends of friends,
Hmm.
that might be right, that might run some online community. It's just like you just want to get started with who you already know or who would be willing to make an introduction, and that is very possible for almost everyone, right? We
Yes.
all have like a handful of people, or you can just like start, and then, honestly, I can say my best clients have come from being in front of other people's audiences, because I make sure that when I speak in front of a community where I know values aligned with the person who runs it. So there's that, there's just this fit. And also, like you shared, right, intimate groups. When
Hmm.
you sell high ticket, which is, what I'm an expert on, they crave that proximity. They crave that access. They crave the intimacy of being in a room with you and being able to ask you questions and to get your opinion. So the more reflective the initial experience is, the more likely they're actually going to convert down the line.
Oh, I love the way that you phrase that. Also, what a great teaser. So, Meryl just mentioned the word intimacy, and this is a concept that we're going to really dial in on over the course of our conversation because it's related to a hot take that I'm going to ask Meryl about later in
Love
our
it. I'm
interview.
here for it.
So great teaser. But if we're looking at where you were in this moment, you had your list, like you mentioned, for about 2.5 years. It was sub 1,000 subscribers, but these people were very, very engaged, very connected because they had come to you through guest speaking opportunities. So I know one of your signature ways of engaging with your community is through an email newsletter. And
Yeah,
email newsletters, I mean, we've all been on a list for an email newsletter. We've maybe all created an email newsletter. There's so many different types of newsletters out there, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people depending on your
totally.
experience. So, I would love to know for you and how you chose to nurture your list with your newsletter. What was this newsletter about? Was there a specific structure, format? What was the frequency that you were sending newsletters to your existing list? Give us kind of the high level view
Scoop.
of what this newsletter is like. Yeah.
Yes. And I love this question because it actually really matters in the success of how you're able to sell off of your newsletter content. Like, I'm a very creative person, as you can imagine. So I personally don't work well with planning and rigidity and sort of like, okay, this is how we're going to do it moving forward. But rather I gave myself a creative brief.
Mm.
So, if you're familiar with like British baking shows and stuff like that, it's always like, make this thing. These are your ingredients. Now create this artwork. And that's exactly what I did with the newsletter. So I sat down and I was like, okay, how can I create something that is so high quality, that is so amazing, that is so like just the thing that they needed to hear that day, right? These beautiful, sort of almost like a string of pearls, but like shifts of perception, right? Like
Yeah.
just moments of like, oh, wait, oh. That was my creative brief. I was like, I'm going to send like wealth prayers and poems and deep reflections, and I'm going to treat it like a diary wherever I have a moment of realization or a piece of wisdom that I've been able to alchemize from, I mean, entrepreneurship some days is a sort of like a never ending buffet of shit sandwiches. We all know this, right? And sort of like how I've been able to like extract the wisdom from those experiences and then share them. And I was like, I'm like you, I value transparency. So it's like, I'm going to be really transparent there, more so than anywhere else that I see in the industry. And so that was what I started doing.
I wanna jump in real quick before you get further because this concept of a creative brief, I think is probably new. I mean, it was new when I was, reading your pitch to come on the show. I
Yeah.
thought to myself, "Oh, that's interesting." We deal with creative briefs all day in the sense of, when we're partnering with brands for sponsored content or campaigns, they'll send us a creative brief, let's say, for an ad that we will then
Yeah.
utilize to create a script or decide the direction of a partnership. But a creative brief in the sense of a newsletter is a new concept to me. It's novel to me. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. So I want to know, can you describe to me, like, if someone were to replicate that same approach to their newsletter or their way of nurturing their email list, how would they create a creative brief for themselves? What components need to be in it? What is the purpose of having a creative brief before they even begin you know,
Writing
uh,
anything.
writing,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, totally. So I'll give you my interpretation and how it's been helpful to me. So I wanted to first decide how I wanted people to feel, right? So when you create art, there is more desire to have someone have a certain realization or have them go through a certain emotion rather than here is the list of the three things I need them to know, right? Or it's sort of
Mm.
like less information based and more centered around like what emotions and pieces of awareness do we actually want to have click into place as the jumping board to then have the information that you share land really well or have the action that you wanted them to take feel like an absolute no-brainer because they're having an emotional experience, right? I very often receive as feedback, your email made me cry. Your email made me laugh. Your email was something I showed to my partner, and then we had way more sex than we usually have, right? Like stuff like that. It's like, and that makes me happy. I'm like, okay, in the end, we know that buying decisions, the vast majority are emotion based
Mhm.
decisions that we make. But, right, so many of us focus on strategic and information, sort of like how we drip out the information, how much we give, how much we don't give. And I was like, no, I'm going to speak directly to their hearts and also to their subconscious, right? I use art, right, like poetry, for example, as a way to not speak to their intellect, but just go straight to the heart. And that's where, after being a few months on my email list, people feel already transformed. They haven't actually spent $1 with my company, right? And they're like, this is so rich. Like, I have gone through all these like feelings and emotions and shifts of perception, and I'm a changed human being. Then working together, right, is like, yes, please.
Yes. I want to pull out a nugget of wisdom because you said it a few times now, and I think it's so key for people to really hear this shifts of perception. So, when I first learned this concept of shifting people's perspective or the way that they approach a problem or even a solution, I think the first time I really understood this concept was maybe late 2019, early 2020. And it changed everything for me, you guys, because we often think, to Meryl's point, that value only comes in the form of information or instruction. Like, this is how you do XYZ, step one, step two, step three. Of course, there's value in that. But I think we often, again, overlook the inherent value of helping someone see something in a new way or approach something with a fresh perspective. So, those perspective shifts are equally as valuable. And I love, Meryl, that you really were so focused on how do I make someone feel? What is the experience I want my newsletter reader to have versus and of course letting that inform what information you share rather than the other way around. So I think that approach is very unique, and I know it plays right into your unique newsletter formula that is centered on know, like, trust, which, before I ask you about this, I just kind of want to, call out the elephant in the room, which is that know, like, trust is something that is said so often in our
I
business
know.
space that it often feels like a cliche, right? Like, oh, okay, we get it. Like, people have to know, like, and trust us. But the way that you, again, the perspective shift, the way that you approach this concept of building know, like, and trust, I think is different because you associate it with intimacy, which is
Yeah.
something that you had already teased a moment ago. So I want you to talk to us about this idea of, actually, I feel like this would be a great point to insert the first hot take. You have been quoted to say the best emails are conversation starters. So, in relation to the know, like, trust formula that you use, what tactical things are you doing in your email that are inciting responses to your email?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, it's actually asking for a response and having an interesting conversation, right? Like enough sort of like to actually spark people to want to even reply. To come back to the know, like, and trust, and sort of my take on this with the lens of intimacy, and then I'll go into like how to get people to reply back and stuff like that. Really, what we do, right, especially when we work with people in higher end containers like coaching packages and stuff like that, it's identity shaping work, right? Identity shifting work. That's big, right? It's not something that you just want to have anyone do with you, right? Rather, so, like, I think it's really important for you to know the person who you're going to embark on a journey like this with, and the same things around, like, you probably want to like them or even love them or their approach, right? It's like, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
personal, and we need to be able to trust them, right, in order to also like trust ourselves in their presence. So the way that I do this in email, and this is then also what evokes like the responses. First of all, the no factor is sort of filled in from an email newsletter perspective by actually being really consistent. People can't get to know you unless you show up and are visible, right? In this case, in their inbox consistently, right? If you all of a sudden fall off the radar for a very long time, you need to sort of start to introduce yourself all over again, if you will. So we have no, then there's the like factor, right? I sort of go like, can we make it a love factor? Can we say love? Like I like love.
Yes, I love that.
Is through sharing your personality, right? Or sharing it from a place of like intimacy. Now, what I want to say here, and I actually have posts about this on my Instagram as well, not everyone wants to share intimately about their personal life. This is not a prerequisite. It's something that I'm personally comfortable with, but if you're not, don't worry, you can still use this strategy. You can also, how you say that, like let us in by showing a big experiment that you're running and all the things you're learning. And we get to understand how your brain works and the lens with which you look at your craft or your unique field of like coaching or service providing or whatever it is that you do. So it's just like there's different strategies there. I just want people to know you do not have to share like all your intimate personal life stuff. And then we have, of course, like the trust factor, which is really, again, like through like the intimacy and the consistency and sharing credibility. This is a huge one for women. Yesterday, I was talking to someone who has closed 7-figure deals, who've helped multiple 8-figure businesses be as successful as they are, but nobody really knows her in our online industry. So she's not getting the clients that she wants or at the speed that she desires because simply her credibility is not something that she's actually put forward for us to understand, for us to see. Most women struggle with what I call credibility amnesia, right? We
Mhm.
either forget how much credibility we actually have. We don't see how we can transfer it from cubicle to CEO, and we forget to consistently put it out there. The moment you start doing that, it's not only that your audience can start trusting you, you also remind yourself every day of how awesome you are, right? So you can't forget it. So if you do those three things, right? So basically, be consistent, create intimacy through sharing your personality in whatever way suits you, and you consistently build credibility, there's like this perfect sort of hum that starts to happen that is like the perfect breeding ground for sales. Now we get to the heart of it.
That is so exciting. Okay, before we jump into this next piece of how do you get responses, because I know we've all been on the receiving end, or not the receiving end, but the giving end of asking a question and then not getting any
Yes.
responses, which can be disheartening. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I want to go back for a second to two things. One, I so appreciate, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who finds it encouraging that there's more than one way to build intimacy. And to your point, it doesn't have to be revealing very personal or private details about your life. It can be creating intimacy through, like what you shared, transparently disclosing the process through which you are doing something in your business. And this is something that I just wanted to pull out for our listeners because it's easy to kind of have that be lost in all of the beautiful wisdom that Meryl just shared. But this concept of, some call it building in public, some call it, different things, but it's this idea of, yes, people want to understand your actual process or framework or however you do the thing that you do in your business. But I think what most people leave out, and what, to Meryl's point, creates intimacy, is not just the process itself, but how you are thinking through the process, access to your brain of, okay, when a process is happening, are you sharing, okay, when this happens, I do this because XYZ, thought process? Or, oh, when I came upon this hurdle, I approached it in this way, or I asked myself this question, or I took this data point and I, decided to do this or made a decision around this because all of that kind of behind the scenes thinking that's happening in your
Yeah.
brain 24/7 that you're not necessarily revealing to people. I think when you allow people a glimpse into that, it does create such intimacy because people feel like they're getting a chance to see how your brain works, exactly like what Meryl said. And so I really wanted to highlight that piece for our listeners in case you missed that point because it's such a huge takeaway from what you just shared, Meryl. And then the second thing I wanted to ask you to give a little bit more detail on is the credibility piece. I totally agree. Credibility amnesia is a condition that plagues many of us, especially women, as you astutely observed. So I would like to know what are 2 to 3 specific ways that you infuse credibility or 2 to 3 opportunities women can look out for,
Mhm.
to insert a credibility piece. Can you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, actually, it's like a very simple process, like a very beautiful, graceful, simple process. Like I love it when it's simple. It's like, yay, it can be simple.
Yes.
What I have my people do is just create a long, long list, like 25, 35 things that give them credibility, period. So it's not even like specifically in your field that you currently are in. I have as
Mhm.
one of the pieces of credibility that I often talk about and put forward. I home birthed all our three daughters, and that was
Wow.
it. Like I still feel like, wow, that was courageous what you just did. Like,
Yes.
wow, and the last birth of our third daughter was actually here on the farm, so like on an acreage with a midwife, and it was a 90-minute birth, and it was a close to 10-pound baby, and it was like such an amazing experience. So I for example, I have that as a blog post on my website. I have like the three birth stories of our children and sort of how I felt, what I did when I woke up, how I navigated, like, basically having to deliver that day because it was 10, 11 days overdue, and, all those things. And again, it shows people like my inner workings, right? In this particular
Mm.
case, it's, quite a personal topic because I have higher comfort levels with that, but you can do it about something else as well. And people on sales calls and stuff like that will refer back to, oh, I really felt like a connection with you when you shared that, right? I really felt like, oh yeah, she understands what it's like to, right? And they feel that in. So make a list of all the things that you've ever done that just make you like a badass human being, right? Where you're like, that took tremendous courage, or that was really like wisdom incarnate, like in that moment. I'm proud of that. So make that long list and then start making sure, right? Of course, some of them are going to be like your client wins. Some of them are going to be case studies of some of the own, right, sort of maybe projects or experiments that you did. Some of them are going to be work related or business related, and some of them aren't. Have that list ready, like to go, sort of like either on your desktop or on like an actual physical list, and just constantly remind yourself to weave in those stories on a regular basis.
Mm.
It's like one of those things that I ask myself, like when I send an email, it's like, did I layer some credibility in here, right? Of some variety.
Mm.
So really like holistically, right? Yeah.
That is really, really powerful because to your point, and I'm really glad actually that the example you gave was not business related because it is exactly like how we started our conversation with this idea that just because you're new to entrepreneurship doesn't mean you have no credibility, right? Your transference of your past career or past life skills, your background, your lived experience all form credibility and they all still speak to your competence and your unique gifts that you can bring to the table. And so I really, really love that idea of using that filtering question before you hit send. Ask yourself, did I weave in one piece of credibility in here from my list? So that's the homework assignment for all of you today is to sit down, write that power list, right? That list of anything that has made you proud in your life. That is very encouraging. Thank you so much. I feel like I want to jump to how do you invite people to actually respond to your emails, but I just have this like little nudge that someone listening on the other end might be like, "Okay, okay, I really get that and that's exciting, but like how does that relate to what I'm actually selling in my business?" So I got to backtrack for just one second. So let's take what you just shared, your birthing story, right, for your children. If you were to weave in that as a piece of credibility, I know it might be hard to verbatim speak to like an example. How do you actually relate that to what you're selling or to your business so it doesn't just feel like a random story?
Yeah, so I actually love speaking to this. So when you have an email newsletter, it's actually really cool to sometimes have a whole bunch that don't have a call to action, right? Other than just a
Mm.
welcoming of like responses and co-sharing of stories, especially in between launches, right? This is like not every email has to have a CTA. It's like contrary to industry advice, right? Where it's sort of like, how do I get the most out of my email list? Just sort of like this extractionary attitude. No, I literally share stories and I might say, like, I feel this story matters so deeply to me that I'm quite sure it will matter to you too. And I might not quite know why or how, but I'm going to share it. And then you're going to write me back and help me understand why this is important. Right. So I co create, right? It's like a reciprocal relationship that way where sometimes I'm just vulnerable and saying like this really mattered to me, this happened, and it felt really deep, right? So there's that. It gets me lots of replies. People like, sharing things. When you've shared something with them, they want to share a similar story. And then if I were to tie it back, when you think of business, right, like we're all just like birthing the next big idea, the next big venture, right? So there's like, I could talk about like birthing energy and how it doesn't always have to be a human child. And sometimes, we encounter those stages of birth giving, like in the very projects that we run. And yeah,
That is really helpful, tying in that analogy. I was going to say that's so interesting. I just had kind of an aha moment as you were speaking to this idea of co-creation within your content. I think so often when we email, or I mean, it doesn't have to be email, any form of content medium, really, we feel like we have to deliver an answer. Like, I'm telling you this because it's something definitive that we've already wrapped up nicely in a bow. I really like that you have this approach of, sometimes I share a piece of credibility or a story that I may not know what the reason for sharing this is, but you can tell me why this is meaningful to you. And the fact that it's not a perfectly delivered answer, but rather you are inviting them to help you create the answer, that is a really interesting process that I haven't really thought about before as it relates to email writing. So that was a new aha for me. I hope that was
a
a new
shift of
aha for some of you
perception.
listening as
There we
well.
go.
Yes, a shift of perception, exactly. I love this. Going back to this idea of you seem to measure the success of your emails by the response rates, right? Like how many people are actually responding back to you. If you have any data around, generally speaking, what percentage of your email list who open your emails do typically respond to you, I'd be
Oh,
very
yeah,
curious
that's an
about
interesting question. I'm very much not a numbers person. It's actually interesting. I can't hear numbers very
that.
well.
Mhm.
It's a certain condition, but I basically have to see things visually. So it's like it always fascinates me because I couldn't do math to save my life growing up. It was really horrible, like experience throughout my entirety in school.
Mm.
And very often I can't actually even like speak the numbers,
Oh,
like the
interesting.
huge numbers that I help my clients create in their business, which is it's like, wow, you actually don't need to be like a numbers person to do this. I would say like right now, my open rates are around 50%.
Wow.
We
Incredible.
looked at that yesterday. So this is also goes back to my conversion copywriter sort of period, because that's how I started out in business before it transitioned into business mentorship, where they taught me like the only thing that your email subject headline needs to do is just get people to open it,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't have to be a summary of what's inside. It doesn't need to be a promise. It doesn't need to, right, share information, doesn't need to tell a story. It just needs to be interesting enough to get them to open up. So it's like sort of like looking at the conversion, right, the overall large conversion and chopping it into what I call micro conversions. So people like replying to an email newsletter also is a micro conversion. People taking a snippet of your email newsletter and then posting it online with some of their own thoughts and tagging you is a micro conversion. having somebody reach out to you in DM saying so and so is on your email list and forwarded the email to me and I want to give you my personal opinion or some insights. Those are all conversions, but we're not actually counting them. So that is like a side note. In my email newsletter, I think there's about 4,500 people on there. So it's not massive, right? Not at
Mhm.
all. What I would say is that on average, I get about like 10 replies, and then some emails I get like 30.
That's amazing. Just the fact that it is intention that you have at the forefront of
Yeah.
the way you email, I think that alone can be a perspective shift, right? If we're
Yeah.
thinking about the success of our emails, not just on the hard metrics that we normally track, like open rates, click through rates, but also looking at how many people responded to this email. I think if we even approach with that intention, it changes the way that we write. So I really like that piece. I want to now spend our last couple of minutes actually breaking down the one big email. So, up to this point, we've
Hmm.
talked about all of the things that Merel has done in nurturing her email list and how you can apply similar approaches. But then there was this one email that actually drove $500,000 in sales. And how it did that is this email ended up resulting in 30 highly qualified sales calls. So, high quality leads booking a sales call for Merrill's high ticket offer. And then, of course, that ended up being $500,000 worth. So I'm going to go kind of bit by bit here in breaking this down. Let's start with the subject line. So, like you just mentioned, the subject line, the only purpose is to get someone to open, period. So, what was the subject line of this 500,000 email? Do you remember what it was?
So, what I did yesterday in a hurry, because I knew people would want to see the actual emails, at least I would, like if
Yes.
I was listening to this, I would actually want to see the email. So, what I created like a little giveaway with the actual emails in it. And then also, what I wanted to just invite people to come and do is play with me in that document, and
Ooh.
ask questions for the first like 2 weeks after this goes live, because I think that's going to be like just super useful, is to just go in there and actually workshop like what worked and why did it work and what were the email subject headlines and like all those details. I've also put an email in there, I just want to say, that made me $1 under six figures last week. So I sold a high ticket private offer. I didn't even start as a sales email. I was just like, I'm having this thought, I'm just gonna write it. I was writing and I was writing, I was totally into it. By the way, like I listen to very specific music. I just want to say as well, when I write, I love the soundtrack of Interstellar for some
Oh my
reason.
goodness. It is one of the most speaking of emotions, it is one of the most emotive scores I have ever heard. I cannot, to this day, when you hear the run where Matthew McConaughey is watching the videotapes from his children growing up before
Oh,
his eyes. Oh my god, I still cry every time I hear that score anywhere, and it's been a trending sound on TikTok recently, and
I know.
every time I hear it, I'm just crying, and I'm like, "Oh my
Yeah.
god, it's so powerful." Anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, but like this reaction that you just gave me, that's exactly why it works so well when I'm creating my emails, because they're deeply emotionally fueled, like just missives, not just like what am I going to write today to like milk the most money out of my email list. Right? There's
Mm.
like I mean, talk about creative briefs. And so I listen to that. I have my sound blocking headphones in as I listen to that, and I just sit down and I go all the way like in a state, to be honest, right? Like, but after years of writing these high quality emails, it's also very easy for me to slip into that state, right? So
Mm.
something you have to be sort of patient developing. As you go, you will improve. So yes, right, state, and then I start writing. So I was writing this email. She paid in full the email that I sent, the person who replied and who bought from me. So that email made me 88,000 just last week, right? She's
That's
just like wiring
incredible.
that money.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I also wanted to thank you, by the way, before I forget, for your generous gift to our listeners. I was like, if you're watching this on YouTube, I was like doing a mind blow emoji when in real life acting it out. When Meryl was saying how not only is she like giving you the actual word for word email, the $500,000 email, so that you can see it with your own eyes and digest, but also the fact that she's inviting you to comment inside the document and make it a collaborative conversation, that she's going to spend time in there in the first 2 weeks of this episode airing and actually answer your questions as you dissect it and digest it in real time. That alone, I feel like could be a case. Like, I'm so fascinated by this. I truly, I don't know if you've done this before, Meryl, but I've never heard anybody come on any show, mine or other people's shows, and be like, "Oh, I'm gonna give you this like opt-in or lead magnet, but also I'm going to like actually be in there co-creating or having this conversation with you." That is such an interesting opt-in offer. So like I'm very just even that was a new kind of like idea for me. I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know you could do that." So again, creativity. I really, really love that. So thank you. Circling back though to the actual structure of the email, I mean, I definitely want people to go and opt in to read the whole email, but could you give us the subject line if it's in front of you?
Yeah, I'm just going to read all the email subject headlines actually as I'm going down. So the one that brought in 88,000, normally I have very like imaginative email subject headlines, and this one literally wrote a brand new done for you private offer. So it wasn't like playing around. I was just like, this is for the people who already know they want to work with me, who've been on this email list, hoping and praying I'm going to make them an offer. And here you are. Email case study number 2, email subject headline is 10 lessons from my $1 million plus launch. That one brought in about 300,000. They also like gave you descriptions of what the email was supposed to do, like purpose, timing of when we sent it in the launch. So you can just have a look at that. The one underneath that I put in because I wanted to show you an example of an email where I'm not making an offer, but you're going to read
Mm.
it. And especially if you listen to like the Interstellar track while you read it, you're going to be like crying under your desk by the end of it, just to show you how that's done. And then the subject headline for the $500, no, 500. Oh my God. You see, I can't even speak numbers. $500,000 that came in through, of course, sales calls. It says only 1%. Ugh, dot, dot, dot. And then between brackets, I need you to change this exclamation mark and then close bracket. What it refers to is the stat that tells us that only like this tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of women actually ever reach the 7-figure mark in business. And so the whole email sort of talks about like, why do we think that this is the case and how are we going to change it and what is possible? And I shared with my community that my clients brought in a combined added revenue that year of $25 million. This is over the course of sort of like 125 women, and that
So
everybody was like,
impressive.
wait, you either must be lying or like, what are you doing? And I was like, actually, this in the grand scheme of things, this isn't that much money, like spread out over this many people. What's wrong with this picture is that you perceive it as like this massive number because in the online space, at least a few years ago, it was basically if you made 7 figures, you were an anomaly. I can never say this word, anomaly. Anomaly.
Anomaly. Yes.
It's like the start of Finding Nemo, anemone, anemone. If you have ever seen that movie, it's
Yes,
like
I have.
anomaly. So yeah, like I went into that. I shared my own story, and then it's basically like a call to arms in a way, but like for entrepreneurship and women getting past that 7-figure mark together.
That is incredible. Oh my goodness. Okay, I can't wait for our listeners to get their hands on this. I'll ask you at the end, obviously, where they can go to download this and to interact with you in the document and actually
Yes.
ask you their questions. But real quick, I want to do a rapid fire, just a couple more questions on your process of sending this $500,000 email or the email that resulted in that revenue. So, subject line you shared with us, did you A B test this subject line? Did you resend to, okay, I see you shaking your head no. Did you resend this email to unopens with a different, okay, also no. All right, cool. Thank you. That's what I wanted. And then,
Quick though, I could feel shame in this moment. I could go like, oh, maybe I could have made like 700 and no, I can't say the word. So like basically 3/4 of a million. I could have made three quarters
yeah,
of a million if I had done that. But what I have learned over the years of being in business is that I'm probably just never going to be that person that is that organized. It's not my strength, it's not my forte, and I'm at peace with that. right? I'm this
Mm.
highly creative powerhouse, like multimillionaire mother of three, like on like a farm in the prairies. There's so many amazing things about me. I'm just going to celebrate who I am and know that, yeah, I'm probably never going to be that much of a numbers person.
I love your self assurance in who you are, like so deeply grounded and celebratory of who you are. I think that really, of all the perspective shifts that happened in today's conversation, that is probably one that will impact your life the most, those of you listening, if you choose to embrace it. So, thank you for modeling to us what that looks like, Meryl. My final question to you to wrap this case study, and then of course we're going to tell people where they can get their hands on this amazing document that you've prepared for them with all of the emails listed out. But my final question around this case study is, so 30 sales calls were booked from this email that then generated $500,000 in revenue. What was the call to action? If you have the document in front of you, can you read for us what was the call to action that you gave for people to go book the call?
Yeah, so the call to actions were actually pretty straightforward. Like enrollment closes next week was one of them. So the CTAs were not like thrilling, but the email itself is. I'm a huge fan of also just clarity. So at one point in the email, you need to stop rousing emotions and you just need to start telling people what to do if they want to buy the thing. At the end, though, it says, and remember, aim high. Give yourself time and let's turn 1% into something so much bigger. We'll have the kind of wealth and leverage that can steer the fate of humanity.
Wow. What a big vision that you're placing in their heads, and it's so empowering, whether they book that call or not. Just, I think, again, it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, that string of pearls, that string of perception shifts, that alone might have encouraged or pushed someone to dream a little bigger than they had before. And so that's such a good note to end on. Meryl, tell our listeners, where can they go to download this doc of emails?
Yeah, what's the most practical? Can we just pop it in the show notes? Does that work? Is that the easiest?
Yes, we'll put it in the show notes. And if you're listening to this, please make sure you take a second to scroll below and, download that. And of course, if you're listening to this within the first 2 weeks of the episode release, definitely take advantage of Meryl's generous offer to answer your questions inside the doc, and go comment on the document and ask her the specific questions that I maybe didn't have a chance to cover with her today. Thank you so much, Meryl, for your time today. Where else can people find and connect with you online?
Yeah, find me on Instagram. That's my main platform now that I want to grow this year. So I'm spending a lot of time on there. We had so many beautiful, like branching off, sort of like separate mini conversations where I'm like, I did a whole post on that, or I did a whole series on that. So I would say, come join me in my universe there. You simply type in my first name and last name, and I will pop up. And also just come say hi in the DMs. Like I am very approachable. Come have conversations with me, share about like where you're at on your journey, and I might have some additional resources for you. I'm just very excited for all of you listening about like embarking, already being in this incredible business adventure that we're all having here.
Amazing. Meryl Kriegman, everyone. Thank you so, so much, Meryl.